Hello, I'm Penny Thornton and I'm talking astrology. On this video, I'm going to be talking about the new moon in Cancer and also the summer solstice. And the two events come quite close together, which is why I thought I'd combine them. I'm going to be talking about the summer solstice to begin with, and then I'll come on to the new moon itself. And, in recent times, I've been focusing a lot more on the full moon. As you know, I don't get to make a lot of videos because there are just so many other areas of work I'm working in, whether it's writing, whether it's seeing clients, whether it's, 100,000 things. So the max I can do at the moment is about 2 videos a month. So I've been focusing really on the full moon and then any other astrological events of importance. And of course, this year, 2025, is absolutely chock full of important events. And I'm going to be doing another video in about a week, and this is going to be on Uranus. Uranus will be entering the sign of Gemini, and I'm going to be looking at that from the perspective of the 12 signs. And I still have not yet done the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, and I'll be doing 2 of those, one this year, one next year. And that's because in July, Saturn and Neptune will be incredibly close. They'll be within minutes of each other. So, it's important. And a lot of the things that have been happening recently really do smack of this Saturn-Neptune conjunction. If I go back really to the death of Pope Francis and the arrival of the new Pope, that's really end of a regime. We've been talking about that with Saturn and Neptune. And I think a lot of other things we're going to see as we go forward in these next 12 months, I would say, which really reflect that theme. But I'm going to save it till then. Now, I should always say before I even get into the astrology, but I'm an Aries and I get terribly impatient. I just want to talk about the astrology. And then I get reminded that maybe I should say something about thanking all of you for all your comments, which I read every single one of them. And I reply to those in detail when there's a real astrological question. Otherwise, I'm probably just going to say thanks, appreciate that. And also how much I appreciate those of you who subscribe. And if you're new to my channel, you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe because it does help grow the channel. And I think that's it's certainly important to me, but I think just generally, if we want to look at this kind of astrology and to share it, then I think that's important. So, yes, thanks, done. Now on to the things that I'm really going to talk about. I'm going to go back in time and I'm going to give a shout out to astrology because those of you may have seen my video, which really covered the 9th of June through to the 18th of June, this really, really important period of the year. Will know that I went through all the aspects. And of course, I did the same thing on my Friday Bite on my website. And, when we astrologers are looking ahead and we're looking at the forthcoming alignments, we're looking at where planets are, how they're relating one to the other, we're looking out for eclipses, all sorts of things come into our judgments. But not all of us, and I'm certainly not one. I'm not psychic. I don't actually see events. I can't really look at the mandala of the horoscope and think, oh, I see this happening. It's really a judgment call. It's about saying, we've seen this before in times past. What has that meant? How is it shaping up now? And of course, every single time we come to even something we've seen before, it's in an entirely different setting because everything is moving and changing all the time. It's a little like one of those kaleidoscopes that we used to have when we were kids, that you shook it or you moved it and suddenly everything was a different pattern. And that's really a little bit why it's quite challenging being an astrologer to say ahead of time how these things are going to shape up. So this all-important time, and if I go through some of the things that were really so important, we were looking at the week kicked off, 9th of June, we had a Venus-Pluto square, then we had Mercury squaring Saturn and Neptune. We then were rolling into a Mars-Uranus square on Saturday, the 14th of June. And of course, in the middle of that, we also had a full moon. So it was really an intense period. And I think most astrologers who do the sort of work that I do were looking at this particular week and thinking the roof's going to come off. It's so intense. And in case any of you have forgotten, I think it really kicked off with was really the protests in Los Angeles, which then inspired President Trump to send in the National Guard without the wishes of the governor, Gavin Newsom, and then then the Marines went in. So that got everybody very up in arms, in that it wasn't necessary, according to some people. And that then started or sparked a whole lot of protests, which became known as the No King protests. And of course, they culminated on Saturday, the 14th of June, President Trump's birthday, when on one side of America, you had this military parade celebrating 250 years of the US Army, and also President Trump's 79th birthday. And on the opposite side of the country, you had the big protests, No King protests in Los Angeles. And of course, they were also repeated, those protests, across the country. So about 5 million people, I think, altogether out on the streets, up in arms about President Trump, while over on the other side, in the Washington area, there was this celebration of US power going on. So that was certainly something. And in the middle of all that, as if we needed anything else, Israel attacked Iran. And of course, since then, because I'm recording this on Monday, the 16th of June, there has been some intense fighting. And Israel has really attacked Iran at a time when, it didn't have quite as many resources with which to back, which is probably why it went. And so we've seen some very important military commanders gone. And we've also seen a lot of nuclear sites and those kind of things attacked. And one other thing I need to say about this last period was that on that Mars-Uranus conjunction, which we associate with aggression, we associate it with action. We think about earthquakes sometimes, and that's why a lot of astrologers have been expecting big earthquakes and volcanoes to erupt. And that is the sort of aspect upon which that happens. But also we see wars break out, which of course in this case was correct. We saw the attack on Iran, and we also saw this kind of friction, really intense friction, again, most easily expressed when we look at what's going on in America. But on that Mars-Uranus square, exactly, four important senators, politicians, lawmakers, and their spouses, they were attacked, they were assassinated. In Minnesota, there was two assassinations, and then there was an attack also a bit further down, in the area. So assassination is a very Mars-Uranus effect. And I think it would be fair to say that because the last time Mars and Uranus were, not the last time, the first time actually, last year, 2024, when Mars and Uranus were, squaring, or it was happening on President Trump's midheaven, he too was the focus for an assassination attack. So when we looked at it this time and we saw President Trump's chart very much in the crosshairs of all this activity, and he's fine, but the thing about when you look at what he is coping with at the moment, and looking at the fact that he was looking to celebrate America, celebrate the power and the importance of the presidency, and yet at the same time there are real attacks on his administration going on. So in this case, that's how all that was expressed. And I thought it was important to look at it so that we can check back on our astrology. And of course, the video is there if you want to see it. But let's get into what's happening at this particular time. And I'm going to start really with the summer solstice. Now, 4 times a year, the sun reaches 0 degrees of a cardinal sign. On the 21st of December, or thereabouts, it reaches 0 degrees of Capricorn. On March the 21st or 20th, it reaches 0 degrees of Aries. On the 21st or 20th of June, it reaches 0 degrees of Cancer. And when we get to the 21st of September or thereabouts, it reaches 0 degrees of Libra. And these are the cardinal points. And the cardinal points are the power points of the zodiac. And what we do at this time, apart from the fact the events that tend to happen on a solstice, or the equinox, whatever we're looking at, those events tend to be really powerful because they're happening around that 0 degrees. But astrologers set up a chart for the moment the sun arrives at 0 degrees, and we set it from the perspective of any country we want to look at. Could be anywhere. It could be Sydney, Australia. It could be Oslo in Norway. Wherever you choose, and you have a look, and you see what that looks like at the moment that happens, and then that sets in place a pattern for the next 3 months, which is why these ingress charts are really rather important. So I'm going to start from the beginning, and I'm going to start with the summer solstice chart, the Cancer ingress chart, and I set it from the perspective of Israel because I thought that was a really important thing to do. As you know, I'm a few days away from the summer solstice here. I'm here on the 16th of June. By the time you're hearing me and looking at me now, it's going to be, well, the day of the solstice probably. So let's have a look at this chart, and you'll see the sun at the 9 o'clock position of this chart, 0 degrees of Cancer, Jupiter just below it at 2 degrees of Cancer. And I've drawn in a configuration, which I'm going to come to in a moment, because that's a very important part of this particular summer solstice, or this particular ingress chart. Now, the significance of this particular ingress chart for Israel is the fact that the sun is on the ascendant. It is rising. Now, don't you think that's interesting? The sun rules the sign of Leo, and this particular engagement, this particular operation in Iran was called Rising Lion. And this is a really, really symbolic picture of that, with a Sun-Jupiter conjunction rising. So I looked at it from that perspective and thought, this has success written all over it. And can I just say right now, I'm not taking a political position here. I am not looking at this and giving 3 cheers for Israel or thumbs down for Israel, nothing. I am just simply looking at the astrology and telling you what the astrology is saying. So we see a rising Sun-Jupiter conjunction. This is a very, very successful, very protective, very good thing. Now, it's not the only story in town, because the Sun-Jupiter conjunction is squaring, or 90 degrees away, from Neptune and Saturn, which occupy the 10th house of this chart and are located at the 12 noon position. So if we look at Sun and Jupiter and we think, how glorious is that? What a celebration. What a portent of success is this? But then you look at the Neptune-Saturn conjunction, which is squaring it, which says there will be repercussions, and there are, well, I talked just a moment ago about Neptune and Saturn having to do with the end of regimes. So on the one hand, we could look, hopefully, and then I shouldn't say that because that means I'm speaking out against Iran, and I'm not against Iran or the Iranian people, but there is a sense of this particular quarter seeing the end of a regime. Now, the end of the regime could be the regime in Iran, because that's the focus of Operation Rising Lion, but we could also be seeing the end of the regime in Israel. It's looking doubtful, I have to say, but it's a possibility. And I think, to me, when I look at this chart, what do I get? I get the impression of something in the sunlight, but what's lurking in the shadows? What is it that we can't see? And what is it in the next 3 months in the future of Israel is going to be something that we're not going to think of as being a very good thing, as being a rather dark and difficult experience coming out of this. We'll have to wait and see. But there's something else that I, excuse me, want to look at in this chart, and I've drawn out this triangle here. And what it is Mars is in conjunct Neptune and Mars is in conjunct Pluto. Now, it's sort of making a finger of fate configuration. It's not perfect, but you know, the angles are there. It would be nice if something was opposing Mars right in the center of that, and we'd have a real configuration there that would be saying even more than this one. But what we have when we look at a finger of fate is the main protagonist, which in this case is Mars. And what do we know about Mars? It's about conflict. It's about war. It's about passion. It's about aggression. It's all those principles. And that's the protagonist. But in conjunct that, 150 degrees away, are Neptune and Saturn. And looking at it from the other side, 150 degrees away, is Pluto. Pluto and Neptune are in sextile. In other words, they're at a harmonious distance from each other. So we've got a harmonious piece to this shaping, this configuration and this puzzle, but also angles of tension. So we could look at it in this way of saying Mars, which is representing conflict, aggression, and war, has a good purpose in the long run, will bring about something good. We could look at it that way. I don't know whether ultimately we will all see it that way. And of course, it depends on your view, you know, whether you're an Iranian and part of that government, you probably wouldn't see it as a good thing in this chart, because it is, after all, set from the perspective of Israel. And we've got this riding high, this Neptune-Saturn conjunction. So we are looking, when we look at mundane astrology, we look at political astrology, whenever we've got planets on the ascendant or in the first house, and the sun is the important thing here because it is about the sun. It is the sun's entry into Cancer. We're always looking at the appearance of the country in the same way that the ascendant in our natal chart is about how we greet the world, how we come across to the world, how we look to the world. It's the same thing in a mundane chart. It's how the country looks to the world. And that's why you see a sense of victory here, a sense of celebration, a sense of pride. And that's the way I'm going to be looking at that. Now, we could also say, as we look at this, and we can see this as well, is that the Sun and Jupiter are also in conjunct Pluto. They're sextiling Mars. So we've got another finger of fate here. We've got the Sun and Mars in harmony, but each of them are in conjunct Pluto. The Sun and Jupiter in conjunct Pluto, Mars in conjunct Pluto. And Pluto is in the 8th house, which suggests to me a great loss of life. So victory has come at the price of a great loss in life. And whether you see that in the very near future, around the time of the sun's entry into Cancer, or whether it takes a full 3 months to play out, that we can see. another thing that you might do when you're looking at an ingress chart is that you might look to see if anything of the country concerned is being brought out of the solstice chart. And in this case, the things that I thought might be significant really were Venus and the moon are both in Taurus. And of course, Israel is a Taurus country. And I think that too sort of says something about this being something good related to Israel here. And I know a lot of you who are listening won't want to hear that because you're thinking particularly about what's going on in Gaza and the huge loss of life in Gaza. But I want to try to keep the astrology pure here and not really get into whether it's good or bad, so much as we're looking at it from Israel's perspective, and therefore these are two further plus factors in its favor going forward through the next 3 months. So I also wanted to look at this summer solstice from the perspective really of London. And here we go, this is all about Great Britain. And we can see here the sun has just, well, it's almost in the second house. It's partly in the first house at the very end of it, the Sun-Jupiter conjunction. And we have this Mars, Neptune, Saturn, Pluto finger of fate, Yod here. We have it again made even stronger because Pluto is conjunct the midheaven. And of course, when we look at the other Yod, that makes Pluto even more important because again, yes, that's also the focus of the Sun-Mars one. Now, because Jupiter is very definitely in the second house, the sun is attached to Jupiter. So we may have a tinge of a sense of the country looking good to the rest of the world. But obviously what we're really looking at here is the economy. And the economy is a really big story for Great Britain because we're really struggling economically. So I quite like the idea that we've got a Sun-Jupiter conjunction here, which says there could be better news for the economy. But, the Sun and Jupiter are in conjunct Pluto. We've got the sun sextiling Mars, which is also in conjunct Pluto. It's a complicated picture. And Pluto is so near the midheaven, which tells us this is about the government and also about the king, because in a way we have two rulers of England. We have the King of England and we have the Prime Minister of England. So with Pluto here, we are looking at some changes. Now, I am fully expecting at some point for there to be some kind of an announcement about King Charles going forward and the future of the monarchy. I'm going to come to that shortly when we look at the new moon. So that could in part be to do with the royal family and things going on with the royal family, changes to the structure of the royal family, and some important announcements going forward. But we could also look at the governing party, which is Labour, which is in power, and we can see that there could possibly be some changes within the cabinet, or even some trouble for Sir Keir himself, maybe a brush with cancer, scandal is what I meant. Sorry, is that a Freudian slip? It isn't meant to be. So we could be looking at something to do with Sir Keir and the government there. Saturn and Neptune also part of this picture because the Sun and Jupiter are squaring it. We see here, I think, the effect of enterprise in Great Britain. This isn't looking good for the entrepreneurial spirit of Great Britain. I think it's really hit by the economy and also perhaps by some of the problems that we've had with the cost of energy. And because Mars is in this chart as well, as we saw in Israel's chart, we can see here that the whole business of how involved the United Kingdom is going forward in any kind of war or preparations, defense policies, banding together with Europe as a united force. Some of the troops are already being sent into Iraq. So we could be seeing here perhaps a little bit more of a tell about Britain getting much more involved in war than it has been. So I'm looking at those two things principally. Right. Oh, one last thing. Have a look at the moon there at 0 degrees of Taurus. King Charles's moon is 0 degrees of Taurus, which is why I think, during this quarter from the summer solstice, we are going to be hearing some pretty important things about King Charles. Okay. So I'm also going to look at it from the perspective of Washington, which means we're looking at it from the point of view of America going forward. So look where we have this important yod configuration. Here we have Pluto rising, and of course it is in conjunct Mars in the 7th house, and Mars is in conjunct Saturn and Neptune in the 2nd house. So the picture I get from here, remember Pluto is on the ascendant, so we're looking at things to do with the appearance of America to other people. How is America projecting itself? And we see with Pluto, it's certainly in transition. It's being transformed. And because Mars is linked to that Pluto, Mars is linked to Saturn and Neptune is linked to Pluto, we get the feeling that the divisions, which are so apparent, and what I talked about, in connection with that all-important week, 9th to the 16th of June, where we saw the protests in Los Angeles and No Kings Here protest. It looks as though this is a continuing thing. And also we've got Mars in the 7th house here. So the apex of this yod configuration is the idea of other countries being at war with America. Now, I don't necessarily mean that there are going to be missiles. In fact, I don't mean that at all, flying over America. What I mean is the fact that other countries are opposed to what America is doing. And I think the fact that Mars is in conjunct Saturn and Neptune in the 2nd house of finance here, we could be looking at some problems stemming from the tariffs and the effects on the American economy. So I think the American economy is going to be struggling in this next quarter. I don't think a Mars in conjunct Saturn and Neptune is necessarily very good for the economy. Having said that, the sun is all important because it is about the sun's entry into Cancer. I find this quite interesting that the sun is in the 5th house along with Jupiter, which puts forward the whole idea of a sport and entertainment and things to do with theatre and not necessarily the film industry, but all of that kind of thing. Also to do with children and babies. And I'm wondering here about the whole issue with abortion. And remember, we've got another configuration here, the Sun, Jupiter, sextiling Mars, but in conjunct Pluto. Is there going to be some incident regarding, abortion rights or something like that? Or do we see something affecting children in the sense of new legislation coming in? Of course, we're looking here, as I said, at the arts, the entertainment, the sports industry. And you know what made me think when I looked at this chart? I thought, well, I wonder if an American or 2 Americans are going to win Wimbledon. That was the thought that came to me. So moving swiftly on, let's get on with our new moon. And as I said a little moment ago, the reason I put these two things together is because they are happening within days of each other, and it seemed a good idea because a lot of the configurations that I've just talked about in the summer solstice chart, these Cancer Ingress chart, they're still the same. Mars hasn't moved very much further forward, and we do get a different pattern, but there are still some of the elements of the previous chart, the summer solstice, in that one. So let's have a look at this new moon here. Put that up on the screen. And I've done this from the perspective of London, just because it's my country, so why not? And we see that beautiful Sun, Jupiter, Moon configuration right up at the top of the chart. It's not on the midheaven exactly, because the midheaven is 13 of Gemini, so we're quite some distance from that. So we can't call it angular, but it is in the 10th house of government, of things to do with the ruling class, we put it that way. And it is looking very jubilant. And if you remember, in the Ingress chart, we also had that theme coming out about King Charles, and we also had it coming out about Sir Keir Starmer. So I talked about both those things. I'm going to come back to that, and I'm going to talk a little bit more just about the new moon itself. Let's not even think about it being conjunct Jupiter. We'll just think about what a new moon is. And a new moon is always a new beginning. We can never see the new moon. We only start to see it as it's beginning to wax. So we see that little slither in the sky. And this idea of a new beginning, a new chapter, is the idea that we get 12, 13 of these in a year, and they're all going to be taking place in a different part of your horoscope, so, or your natal chart, let's put it that way. So when we think about a new moon in Cancer, it may have more meaning for you if it's falling in your second house, for instance, because that would mean there's some new income coming in, because the second house is finance. In the seventh house, that new moon would indicate a new relationship or a new stage of a relationship. So we use this idea of a new chapter. You know, it will be directed at the chapter, at the house in which it's taking place. But when we think about the sign of Cancer, we think about, what does it rule? Well, it's ruled by the moon, and the moon has everything to do with the home and the homeland. It has everything to do with mother and mothering, with creation, if you like, with hospitality, with care, with nursing. So a lot of things about this new moon may apply in that regard, and that maybe all of us, when we think about that new moon and we think about it consciously, we think about what can we relate to and incorporate into our lives, into our worlds. It may be a new start on the home front. Does that mean a new coat of paint in the kitchen? Or does it mean a new baby coming into the family? Or does it mean a new cycle for family life? These are just things to consider as the broad theme of a new moon in Cancer. And I think our capacity to nurture is also very Cancerian. And nurture isn't just about caring for our family. It's about nurturing plants. It's about growing from the seeds. And I think I often say to some of my clients, when I want to encourage growth in their lives, is to plant a seed in a pot. You don't have to have a massive great garden. You can have a pot on a windowsill, but plant a seed and nurture it. And by nurturing and taking care for it and seeing it shoot up and grow, that's actually sending a powerful message to your psyche about things growing through nurturing them. So that really is the theme of the new moon. But of course, it can have a lot to do with new chapters for healthcare, new chapters for the hospitality industry, things related to babies and pregnancies, new discoveries, all those kind of things can flow into that. But let me get a little bit further into this particular chart. I'm going to pop my glasses back on and have a look at it. And we can see we still have this same set of configurations, that we had before, really. They haven't gone anywhere. They're still there. And if we look particularly at Mars, which has now reached 4 degrees of Virgo. So Mars is sextiling the Jupiter, Sun, and Moon, that configuration. But the Mars is also in conjunct Pluto, and the Sun is in conjunct Pluto. But right in the center of this, we've now created a little bit more of an interesting configuration, is that we have Mercury at 28 of Cancer, directly opposite Pluto. So now we have this sort of little dart configuration. So it's got a little bit more muscle. And the center, remember, I said to you, the protagonist of the planet is always the one at the dark point, at the yod point, the one that's in conjunct the two planets. Now we've got Mercury at the opposite side. We've got a dynamic playing here between Mercury and Pluto. And what we get with Mercury and Pluto, always that buzzword, transformation with Pluto. We've also got elimination. We've got death and rebirth. We've got the idea of things being transformed in a way that what once was is no longer, but new things are coming forward. And when we put Mercury with that, Mercury, the principle of communication, we get the idea that there are going to be some very, very important dialogues during this particular period of time. And of course, we're expecting a lot of huge diplomatic ventures, whether all over the world. I mean, diplomacy must be seen to work. I mean, all wars end in a diplomatic solution. So are we seeing here a lot more of an effort to get diplomatic solutions, which will be very tough, but also very transformative? Yes, I suspect this is probably the case. And as you can see, I've drawn a little link between Mercury and Mars and Mercury and Jupiter. That's because Mercury is midway between Mars and Jupiter. It's Mercury is the midpoint of Mars and Jupiter, which comes out again to do with efforts and a force requiring discussion. That's what that means. And then we've got that dynamic with Pluto. I think that is really important. I was also thinking about that this new moon is, although I've set it from the perspective of London, it's just a means of just showing you what the astrological dynamics are in terms of the new moon. It applies in a way to all of us. What does this new moon augur? So we look at this, the two configurations with Mars at one end. One is the singular and important protagonist in the Mars, in conjunct Neptune, Saturn, in conjunct Pluto, Mars in the 12th house. In the other one, Pluto is the protagonist planet, and in that case, Mars is still involved. And this time we've got the new moon and Jupiter involved. There are two different dynamics here, but they're for all of us. And so it says, in a way, when I think about Mars being in the 12th house, this idea of under wraps, Mars has gone under wraps. And it seems to me, when I look at all of this, on the one hand, we could be looking at, lots of intelligence and efforts made behind the scenes to affect conclusions or to bring things about. So we could also think about this, in our own lives. If Mars happens to be, if you're born in London or somewhere in the UK, you are going to have Mars in the 12th house in your own new moon chart. And we think about, does this also imply to us that we need to keep some of our the things that we wish to do, our ambitions, for instance, our actions shouldn't necessarily be completely upfront. There needs to be some behind the scenes work going on. But again, we look at the configuration with the new moon and Jupiter, which is such an abundant, such a celebratory factor that maybe as well, each of us with this new moon configuration and everything else we have in here should have a time to celebrate something over the next 3 months, even if we deliberately choose that because we know it's in the new moon chart. But of course, quite simply, we're only a few days away from July the 4th, and we're July the 14th, Bastille Day. You know, there are lots of celebrations in different countries at this time, which is a national celebration, but maybe that is an opportunity to make a personal celebration, or if it's your birthday, whatever it is, celebration would seem to me to be part of this picture. The new moon cycle gives us some indication of a forthcoming celebration, which I really, really like in this chart. Now, some of you may already have noticed because you're looking at the sun and moon at 4 degrees of Cancer, and you're thinking about that Jupiter at 3 degrees of Cancer. This particular configuration falls on Prince William's son. He was born on the 21st of June as the sun enters Cancer. And this particular new moon on his sun, conjunct Jupiter, is very special for him. Now, it could just be that he's got a glorious summer ahead of him. He's going off with the family. They're going to have a fab time. But personally, I think this has a lot to do with his role within the royal family. So again, there is some indication, some little intimation that things are changing here. And what could that be? Well, maybe it's another, well, it won't be another charity, but it would be some other important role for him to take on. We'll have to wait and see how that pans out, but that's certainly something. Now, the other thing we need to look at is that this Sun, Moon, Jupiter configuration falls on the United States, Jupiter. And that too does give a sense of something really good coming out of this new moon cycle. It may only be for a couple of weeks, but what's going to happen in that couple of weeks could turn out to be very kind of, it repairs. Remember, Jupiter has a very protective function. So does this repair some of the damage that may have happened in various areas? It may do. And maybe we would look at the same for Prince William as well. Is this a very protective new moon, protecting situations from perhaps being as difficult as they really could be? There is a protective factor going on. So as you can see on the left-hand side of this chart, I have put some dates and some symbols, and I'm just going to take you very quickly through these because these are all patterns that are forming in this particular chart, and they will be present from about the 19th of June through to the end of June. And the first one we see is the Jupiter-Neptune square, which of course I have covered in a separate video. So you can really, go and listen to that and find out a lot more about it. But I think Jupiter and Neptune is it has a divine quality to it, but it also has a sense of delusion. Whenever you put Neptune anyway, not seeing the reality. And, we know that we've had a lot of false information. We look at things happening on the world stage and we think, oh, that must mean that, when in fact it doesn't, it means something else. Or we see diplomatic efforts going on and we think, why are they doing that? And we don't realize that 18 months beforehand, a whole other thing was set in motion. There's a lot of that going on, a lot of that with Jupiter and Neptune. And maybe what we're discovering and will discover in this period that my new moon video is covering, we will discover some things that were planned and have been taking place under wraps, and we're now beginning to see the importance of espionage and intelligence and things done in secret. The Sun in Cancer, 20th, 21st of June, depends where you are in the world, but straight after that entry into Cancer, the Sun squares Saturn on the 22nd. Now that's a kind of, you know, we look at Saturn, and I've certainly looked at Saturn, especially on my Saturn and Aries video, and talked about the constructive side of Saturn. That is, Saturn isn't all bad. We couldn't do without Saturn. This is the skeleton that supports our flesh. And that is a metaphor, really, for the idea that we need structure to support things. So a Sun-Saturn conjunction can be very useful. But Saturn is also a planet that points out the limitations of things, that shows us the seriousness of things, and shows us the ring past not, where we have exceeded boundaries, and that must not happen. So both in the sense of what this means to us, our own boundaries being breached, or where we have gone to excess in our lives in some area, then the Sun and Saturn is providing a check. But it's not a very cheerful thing. And it takes me back to when I looked at the solstice chart and thought about the idea of success and joy and celebration, but at a cost. There is a cost here. There is in the shadows is a cost. And I think it's really, this is what we're looking at. We're looking at that Sun-Saturn square. And of course, a couple of days later, we've got the Sun squaring Neptune. So although we can see each one in its different way, the Sun and Neptune giving us a sense of unreality. It can be a time when we feel out of this world because great things are happening, but at the same time, we can be deceived and we can feel very let down and disappointed. We're never going to get the same picture with Neptune each time. It's going to be sort of different. We put all of this together, as I have just done, and we see that the capacity for grave disappointment, grave consequences of certain actions is also present in our sense of celebration. There's how we knit the astrology together. How do we put all these disparate factors and make sense of them as a piece? On the oh gosh, I've got to put my glasses on again, can't see. On the 24th of June, the Sun is conjunct Jupiter. And of course, I've talked about all of that in connection with the new moon chart. And then the new moon itself on the 25th. And finally, on the 29th of June, before we just head into July, we've got that Mercury-Pluto opposition. So it is an important half of June, really. And again, coming back to what we were looking at when I was doing other videos and seeing, my goodness, June was going to be off the charts with things happening. And I think it's still off the charts in the second half of June, but in a slightly different way. And I really hope that I've been able to explain all of that to you by looking at the charts that I've shown you and, comprehending really all the very different facets that are going on at the same time. Now, to conclude, and this in a way isn't so much to do with everything that I've just told you, but it has more to do with something that came out with the work I was doing with a client. But it does have a bearing on the impact of what I talk to you about is, because I'm a very upbeat person, but I'm also a very realistic person. And I like to say how it is. I don't want to put a pretty bow on something when we really need to look at it in its reality. But I realize sometimes by doing that I get some of you a little bit alarmed and fearful. And that's never my intention. It's not what I want to do. But nor do I want to say everything is going to be great when it isn't. I wouldn't do that. But it made me think, in light of this client who was extremely concerned about a Saturn transit coming up, having had the Saturn transits before, that you know, preceded and covered two of the most difficult periods in her life. She didn't want to go through a third one and was very, very apprehensive. And my response to her was twofold, which you may find interesting. One of the things was, and she was in her 60s, that actually Saturn improves with age. As you get older, your relationship with Saturn, your resonance with Saturn changes. And this is the wisdom of age, isn't it? How we get older and wiser and more reflective. And that's why Saturn with age improves. And we could be looking at that in the sense that as we get older, Saturn aspects have a different quality to them. And that's an important thing to look at, a more profound, purposeful, and I don't want to use the word nice, apart from the fact it's not a very good word, nice, but they become more manageable, let's put it that way. So my other message to her, how I was talking to her, was the fact that, you know, if we fear things, fear does bring about failure. We attract difficult things to ourselves if we are full of fear. So we have to overcome our fear, and we overcome our fear with courage. And by taking courageous steps and being courageous, doing things that aren't done out of fear, but overcoming our fear, this again makes a big difference when we've got a difficult transit. And looking at the times we are living in, and they are quite scary times. We wonder where all these wars are leading to, what is going to happen. But we shouldn't be, you know, rendered, you know, helpless by the fact that we're looking at the fact we're in a dangerous place. What we need is the courage with which to live our own lives and do the right thing, but also invest our leaders and people who are in the front line of what is going on in the world, need to invest them with courage and confidence, or the opposite, criticism. All, in a sense, we have to take part. We have to have that courage. So I think that's really what I wanted to end on. And yes, we live in unprecedented times, and this is certainly an exciting time for astrology to see just how, you know, just what we can learn from what's going on. And also the thing that I always want to put forward, this idea that we must always have hope, because it's hope that also is part of our ability to have courage. We can't rely on hope. We have to have action-backed hope, if you like. But that's all in there. That's all in my philosophy, which I hope comes across to all of you in all my videos on this channel. So thank you for watching. I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.